Hey everybody, welcome to Bandyte's course on procedural texturing and shading. My name is Cedric and today we're gonna make this nice procedural wood texture. So as you can see, we have three variations on the same procedural wood. I'm not only gonna show you how to do this, but also how to set up this group that just outputs parameters you can use for Principled BSDF. And in this one we can very easily change the color of the wood, change the amount of contrast, change the rich scale, as I call it, the distortion and the complexity of the wood, even the roughness if you want a bit shinier wood. So there's some nice things going on with this procedural shader, and it's pretty easy. We're gonna set this up, and then you can have a procedural wood generator. So, if this looks nice, then let's jump right into it. Yeah, let's go. So, we're gonna start off with our base scene. If you don't have one yourself and you want to figure out how to do this, check out episodes 0.1, 0.2 and 0.3 on the Bandyte channel to see how we got here. If you're not familiar with the Principled shader or how nodes work, please check out episode 1 and 2. I'll make a brief explanation there. And in this procedural wood tutorial, specifically, we will check out the wave texture, so that'll be interesting. So okay, we have our Principled BSDF here. And let's just start first creating our texture, like our black and white, how the wood should look. If that makes sense. So let's go Shift A to add a node, and let's use the wave texture. So if I press Ctrl Shift left click, it will connect to a viewer node to the material output, so we can check what this does. If that doesn't work, please enable Node Wrangler. How to do that you can see in earlier episodes. And then we press Ctrl T to automatically get the texture coordinate and the mapping. So basically what this does is use generated texture coordinates. These are 3D coordinates, the X, Y, and Z, and then generate a value on that coordinate with this generative texture. So it's procedural, so it has unlimited quality, which is nice. So we're gonna keep this on. We're gonna keep this on generated. One thing though, we're gonna adjust the rotation a bit to have something like that will work. Let me go positive here. Something like that. So they're a bit of more interesting direction. Of course, we can change this depending on which object our texture is on, and it just gives us an extra parameter of choosing the direction of the wood. Okay, but now we want to change some other properties of the wave texture. So first of all, we have the scale, which changes the scale of an object. But we can pop a value in here, and we can also pop in another texture in the scaling texture. So we just give extra instructions on how to scale it. So we're just gonna make another wave texture and just pop this into the scale. Now we see really funky stuff happening. If we use the same vector on this wave texture, so it takes the same direction, we can see we already have some more interesting lines going on here. So the scale of the waves will now depend on the waves of this one. So if we change the scale of that, we can see it's got some pretty interesting results. So because the wave, the scale, we also kind of want to have this randomly generated. We're also going to add a noise texture. So we're going to texture, and we'll go to noise. So what this one does is just generate some random noise. We wanted them black and white, so we just have the values. And now we want to combine these two. So I'm just gonna use the color mix RGB, or a faster way to do is to select the two textures and press Ctrl 0. This will automatically mix them. And this will bring this into the scale, and we'll check out our wave texture now. This already looks pretty interesting. So, I want to pop down the noise texture to like around 2. Bring the detail up a bit. And a distortion. So the detail is gonna give us like detail within the distortion of like this mix into the scale. These are already some steps we're doing. Let's keep this one to 4.5 and distortion to 2.7 is good. And this already starts to look a lot more interesting than the standard wave. We can also adapt distortion within the wave going into the scale. And then we really start to see some interesting stuff happening. I'm gonna turn down the detail for this because I just want the distortion to have this smooth look. Because wood doesn't tend to have a lot of ragged edges. If you push up the detail here, then we see it's more like smoke or like stone. If you turn it down, it's more smooth. Maybe even pop up the distortion a bit more. These two will be parameters we can adjust later with our group. So you can see we already have some interesting stuff going on here. Now I just want to change the mix here a little bit. We can see that actually by going up, we get less and less detail, and we just get the smoke, the noise reacting on the scale of the wave. But if we turn it on, it goes back to the waves, and we want it somewhere around here. That looks good. Oh, one more thing I want to do is pop in the factor here instead of the color. Yeah, there, it looks better. So now we want to use the same noise texture to distort the wave texture a bit. So what the distortion does is just like go over. This looks very trippy, very nice. But we just want to distort it on places where the noise texture actually has influence. So we're gonna pick the factor and bring it into the distortion. And if you don't do this, you'll see that there where the noise is going, there's not that much detail. But if you pop this in here, these places become a lot more detailed. But we keep the smooth lines in the bigger places, if that makes sense. One thing we're already gonna prepare is in between, because we wanna adjust the value between a noise texture and distortion. We're gonna add a math node. So that's under converter, math. This will basically have a math operation work on the put in factor value and then output the result of that. So put in multiply. Now we can actually control this a bit more. Let's see. Let's put it a little bit higher maybe. Now we really get to see these interesting details and lines. That's become really nice. So what it generates here are these circles, which you see in wood. Once you cut in it, you cut like through the circles of the natural wood. By which counting them, you actually know the age of a tree. It's a handy little nature tips here in your Blender tutorials. So now we're already pretty happy with what this is outputting, but maybe you want to generate a little bit more randomness in this because it still looks pretty straight. Of course, something we perhaps can control. So we're gonna bring these texture coordinates and mapping vector back here. And remember what I said about the vector also being being tree values like X, Y, Z is like RGB. So we can mess up the vectors by putting in a noise texture basically. So what we can do is put in a reroute, put in the reroute in here, and then in between have a color, mix RGB, There we go. And then create another texture, noise texture. Put this one in here. And now you see how this messes up big time. So we want this distortion not to be this big. So we're gonna put this down to, yeah, let's say 1.9, or maybe, yeah, let's say 1.9. There we go. So I'm happy about the scale of this, but I'm gonna go a lot more back to the original factor. So you can see if we go all the way to 1, it picks the noise texture as a factor, and this just becomes very funky and doesn't really look like wood. But if you turn this way back down to 0. This looks good. 0.2. Yeah. I can play with it a little. It's a little bit of personal preference. And we can see a lot more distortion happening on the wood. It even looks like it already has some kind of shape. So that is nice. So now that we're happy with our black and white texture, we actually want to translate this into values our principal BSDF can take. So let's clean up here a bit. Let's put this here. Bring this here. All right. Keep it nice and clean. Make some space in between. All right. So first we want to control the color. We don't want to control the color from here because we don't want the wood to be one color. We actually want it to have effect on, like choosing one color will also choose the highlights and the darker parts automatically, just to make it easier. You could do it manually, but where's the fun in that? So we're gonna put an input color here, so RGB. This will be our color selector. Let's already put that to a nice brownish color. There we go. And now let's add, where did it go? Color mix RGB. Let's add 2 mix RGBs in here. And one will set to dodge, so it will make things lighter, but like by burning the colors, which gives it a nice effect. And the other will set to multiply. So now we'll set our color in the first parameter. So that will be our base color, and it will dodge with the second color. The same with the multiply. So we're gonna output this color into the first color here. And we're gonna preview this. So now it's still brown because it's just dodging and multiplying with simple grays. Now pick the output of our wave texture in here, which will add the lighter parts, and in here, which will add the darker parts. Of course, we want to control how much this adds or multiplies with, because we kind of want to have the contrast control. Like, do we want wood with less contrast, or do we really want something that has burned out highlights and darker parts? Like furnished wood comes in a lot of ways. So what I can do is input value and then just connect the value to these two. So now if I scroll this down and up, it'll change both values of the dodge and multiply. And one thing I noticed is that for the dodge, you'll almost always want to have more of a factor than a multiply. So what I'm going to do is add a math node, highlight the node between the dodge and the value, put this to multiply, and put this on 1.5. That's fine. There you go. And now we have something that controls the contrast. So we already have 2 inputs, one that controls the color and one that controls the contrast. So we're going to put these back here because these will not be part of the group we're creating. So this one we can already pop into the base color of our principal BSDF, and we can already preview it. This already kind of looks like wood. It's missing some nice details, don't you think? So next, let's add a bump map. an easy way to add a bump map is just go to vector, bump, and let's get the vector of this wave texture, so the black and white values, which doesn't really matter because the color is also black and white, and put these in the height. Now, if you preview this bump map, we'll see it's creating very strong ridges. So let's put the strength down to 0.1 for now, and put the normal in here. Let's preview our principal BSDF, and this looks kind of weird. Let's put the roughness over our wood first, and although we kind of see the texture in the wood, it kind of doesn't look like the furnished wood we really want. This is because furnished wood is flat with only the ridges sticking out. So we need to actually flatten out our wave texture before it goes into the bump. We can do this with a converter color ramp. This node will basically, like to the left is black, to the right is white, and we can actually choose what happens in between. So you see, if I slide the white to the left, it flattens out everything except the ridges. But this is a bit too drastic, so what I like to do is keep the white here, put in a gray in, wait for the texture to reload. Maybe in the meantime, you can already save your scene. There we go. And then move the gray one to the left and push it up to the white. And this will flatten it. Pro tip, if you hold shift while dragging a value, it will only put this on small intervals and will kind of flatten out the upper parts while keeping the ridges intact. And that looks a lot nicer. All right. So a last thing I want to add is a value for the roughness. So for the roughness, I'm just going to add some procedurally generated smudges, because you see these a lot on furnished wood, which will give it this extra touch at the end. So we want to create a noise texture. So we go to texture, noise. This already randomly generates noise. Let's go to the vector. And, you know, theoretically, we could just pop it into the roughness. But then we see we might not have the desired result. It kind of already looks good, but we want to go the extra mile. So first thing I'll do is add another color ramp. In here we can adjust the black and white values of the noise. The noise doesn't really create black values, so we have to pop up the black before it really becomes black. There we go. And the same, maybe a little bit back. We can preview this, of course. We can see here some black spots, so a little bit back. Here we go. We're just increasing the contrast. Same for the whites, just before they burn out. There we go. That looks nice. But it still looks kind of cloudy. And if you look at smudges in real life, they actually have a couple of hard edges. And yeah, a little bit more detail. So what we're going to do is the same trick we used earlier. I'm going to press Ctrl T, which will create another texture node I'm mapping. I'm going to duplicate the noise. I'm just going to select these two and press Ctrl 0 for a mix RGB. And now we see this becomes a lot more interesting. So if you pop down the scale of this one, we can actually not make it as exaggerated. We keep this one to 2. And of course, we want to also have a control over this. So we put in a value and we just put them up in the scale. And if we turn up the scale, you can actually see some interesting stuff happening. So the last thing we want to add is a, let's see here, math. I'm going to put this on divide. So it's dividing the color coming out of here by the selected value before it goes into the roughness, which means with this value now, we can actually control the roughness. So if we pop this up, the roughness goes up or down. But we still see that there's some strange stuff happening. This is because we're still going from black to white here. So you're dividing it, but you're just dividing it down to 0, and roughness 0 is super smooth. So what we want to do here is actually pick the black and go put up the value to about 0.6. And now, if you change this value, you see a lot more subtle stuff happening. And we can put this on, let's say 1.2 for now. And this looks still pretty rough. So, make it a little bit smoother. Yeah, and there we go. So now it looks like in the roughness you have like these smudges, which really finishes it off. Alright, I think maybe the strength of our bump map is also a bit too crazy. So let's put this down to 0.05. And keep it supple. The key to realistic texture is really subtlety. So, there we go. It's starting to look real nice. Center this again. And now basically we create everything we need to create the group. But we want to select our group values carefully. We do want the mapping as an input, so we also put these ones up here. I'll put these ones up here. This is also a value we want to control. And there are two more values we want to control from the actual controller. Oh, let's not forget about these mappings. Whoops. There we go. Nice and smooth. We're going to put this value down and we're going to copy it twice. And going over the value of the scale of the first wave texture that feeds into the scale of the second wave texture. I'm just going to press Ctrl C and put this in the value here. And the same for distortion. To keep these values for now. And then I'm going to put them in here. So scale and distortion. So the last value I want to put in here is the roughness. So we're going to have a value here. Pick our value over here. Copy and paste it as well. This is the divide one. We're just going to put one in here as well. And this should be all the ones I selected. Of course, if you want to have more values, you can select them and you can adjust the group later. Just to make things easier. Now I'm just going to select all the middle nodes. Be sure to tap A twice to have no other nodes selected. Press B to select them. And press Ctrl G. There you go. And now if you press Tab, everything is in this nice little group. What we can even do is now delete these values. There we go. We can keep the mapping. And now everything is in here. Of course, this looks kind of messy. So we kind of want to clean things up. So we select our group input. I don't even think you have to select it. No, you don't. We go into here. So the first color we select here is actually a vector. So we're gonna go in here and this is the vector for the wood. Second color, let's see where this one goes. It goes to the color. So that is actually the color of the wood. I'll just call it color. The third one is the value that goes up here. So that's actually the contrast. So with that we select the amount of the factoring of the dodge and the multiply. I'm just gonna call that contrast. Of course with a capital C, keep things consistent. This one is a factor, so the fourth one, go in here. And it's actually a multiply factor. Oh, we actually don't need this one. So we can delete it, because this is also controlled with the contrast. So we pick our contrast and we put it in here. So the next color goes down here and is actually the vector for our smudges. Seeing as this is a different vector, or can be a different vector, we'll just call this vector smudges. The next one is scale, and goes down to the scale of the smudges. So we'll just call this scale, smudges. So the next one is also just the scale of the smudges. So we're gonna delete that one again. And then this disconnected node from the scale, we're gonna put in the scale of the smudges again. So let's real quickly go full screen here so you see what's going on actually. So then we have another scale going into the scale of the wave texture. I actually call this a ridge scale because it kind of determines the scale of the ridges within the wood. Let's go ridge scale. The other one is the distortion of that wave. So I'm just gonna call this, I kind of keep this distortion, it actually kind of fits. The last one is the divide before the smudges. This is actually the how we can determine the roughness of the wood. We're just gonna call this roughness. So now, if you put this down, we can start, you know, organizing things in a way that makes sense. Put the color first, then the contrast, then the ridge scale, because this is the wood. So let's do that first. Let's then put the roughness there. Scale smudge is okay. Well, maybe put that up. Then we have the factors on the bottom. I don't know actually how to change this color to actually be a factor input, because it picked a color as the input, because the input was that needs to go into this one is a color, but the actually inputted value was a factor. Doesn't really matter, but yeah, it would be nice to know how that works. And then we have our vector wood and our vector smudges. And I think that's fine. Well, maybe we can put the scale smudges there. Then we have our wood properties first, and then our two scale smudges. But technically the roughness is also one. This is up for debate. You can really do with it whatever you want. Now we go tab out of it again. Let's select these, put them closer. And the only thing that's left to do, if we go tab again, let's see here. Oh, here it is. So we want to select a node group in the node editor, and then under item properties, we want to call this PRocedural Wood. Enter. So if we control space again, we can see here our wood texture. Of course, the color went back to gray, but let's make this a nice dark red. Let's see our contrast. You can actually play with these values if you go back into it. If you select contrast here, we can say that the minimum value is 0 and the maximum value is 1. And then if we scroll down here, it will actually be between those values. We can select something like this. We can play with the ridge scale here and distortion. So we'll put the distortion, like if you put it way down, it will be very clean, but it can be very distorted as well. Of course, you want to maybe play with the ridge scale if you play with the distortion. And this still looks like nice wood, so that's nice. Of course, the roughness value, which we can play. We can't put it under 1. I think the best values are between 1 and 4. So we want to put them somewhere here. That's nice. We can, of course, play with the scaling of the smudges if we want the smudges to be bigger or smaller. So, of course, we can still play with the rotations here. So if you want the wood in another direction, like this, maybe. This looks very nice. You want to bring the distortion down again. Yeah. And yeah, if for some reason you need to play with the vector smudges as well, and you can rotate these as well, right? You can also always put a UV map in here if you want. If you unwrapped it, but then you have to be careful for seams. But this looks already pretty nice. Go into here, just control space to preview it, go around it, and the roughness might be a bit crazy. Let's go back into the group. I think maybe we kind of overdid it. Another thing that might help is putting this on B-spline to make the transition a bit smoother. So let's wait until that updates. There we go. Yeah. For now. Decrease again. This looks kind of funny. Let's see here. So playing around with the values. As long as you know what the values do. Let's go here. I think I was happier with putting this on linear, I think. Yeah, this looks a bit better. This looks very nice. So now you have your procedural wood group, which you can easily adjust to make your own wood. The contrast down. Let's put the red scale up. There you go. Looks a bit funky, you know. Plastered wood. Make this very smooth. Let's go near like this. Looks nice. So yeah, there you go. That's how you make procedural wood. Hope this tutorial was of help. And if you want to see more, subscribe to Bandyte. And yeah, wood on. See ya!